Okay. Hi, my name is Leslie Lewis. I'm one of the members here at St. David's Church, and I am so lucky to be the mom of two wonderful young adults named Hayden and Owen. And Hayden and Owen are both going to college this year, so I'm going to miss them terribly, but they're part of my great family. And today we're going to get to hear a story about the great family. But before we do that, we're going to say a little prayer. There once was a man who said many amazing things and did so many wonderful things that people began to follow him. He taught them and he healed them and he fed them. One day someone asked, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am the light of the world." We light this candle to remind us that we are Jesus's light in the world. Amen. The desert is a very mysterious place. And today we're going to hear a story about the great family who spent some time in the desert. The desert is always moving, the sand is blowing, and it hardly has any water, and you can get very thirsty, and the sun beats down, and so sometimes people have to wear a lot of clothing to protect them from the blowing sand and the wind and the sun. And it's a very mysterious and crazy place to live, and so sometimes people don't choose to go there, they're just there. When the flood was over and the creatures went out in all four directions of the earth to fill it up with life again, they often gathered along rivers. The people lived in small villages and small cities, and often they lived near these rivers so they would have water for themselves and their animals and for their plants and things. One of the most ancient and greatest of these cities was the city of Ur. And it was down here by the rivers. In the city of Ur, people believed that there were many gods. There was a god for every tree, every rock, every flower. There was a god of the sky and a god of the clouds and water and the land. The world was alive with gods. But there was one family that believed that all of God was in every place. Not a God for every place, but there was one God that was in every single thing. They did not yet know that, but that's what they believed. Abram and his wife Sarah, or Sarai, were part of that family. So here's Abram and here's Sarai, and they were part of that family and they lived in Ur. When it came time to move to a new place, they were not sure that God would be there. They also wondered what the new place would be like. They walked toward Haran with their sheep, their donkeys, and their many helpers. They walked along and stayed along the river because the river guided them to where they needed to go, to Haran, which is right here at the top of the rivers. And they also followed the river, which is called the Euphrates River. And it showed them the way, and it gave them water for all their animals and for them to drink while they made their long, long journey to Haran. It took a really long time, and finally they met people coming out of Haran, and they knew their journey was almost over. Sometimes Abram would go to the edge of the desert and would walk out across the sand and look into the sky, and then God would come so close to Abram, and Abram seemed so close to God that he knew what God wanted him to do. God wanted Abram and Sarai to move again to another new place. And God said, "I will make you a great family. I will bless you, and you will be a blessing." So Abram and Sarai did what God said. They went into the desert west of Haran and walked toward Canaan. They went with all their sheep and their tents and their helpers, and this time there was no river to show them the way or to provide them with water to drink. They finally came upon a place called Shechem. Abram climbed up on a hill and prayed to God, and God was there, so Abram built an altar to mark the place, and then they went on. And they're walking in that hot desert, and they stopped again at another place called Bethel. Abram prayed again to God, and God was there also. Abram built another altar to mark this place too. God was not just here or there. All of God was everywhere. Then they went to Hebron to make their home near the oaks of Mamre. One night, God brought Abram outside. He looked up into the sky, and God came so close to Abram, and Abram so close to God, that Abram knew what God was saying. You will become the father of a great family, and Sarai will be the mother. The members of the great family will be as many as there are stars in the sky and grains of sand in the desert. Abram laughed, and because he and Sarai were very old. God's promise sounded impossible, but God said to change their names. So Abram was to be called Abraham, which means father of many, and Sarai was to be called Sarah. One day, 3 strangers came out of the desert. Abraham was sitting by his tent. He invited them in, and Sarah mixed 3 measures of flour, which is a lot, and she gave them bread and meat to eat and milk to drink and water, as was the custom in that day. And those strangers told Abraham that he and Sarah would have a son. Sarah was standing by the tent and heard them, and she laughed and laughed. They were too old. The 3 strangers went on their way, and do you know what happened? Yep, Abraham and Sarah had a son. This son would laugh and laugh, and so they named the baby Laughter in their language, which is Isaac. When the boy was grown, old Sarah, who was now full of many years, was very tired, and she died. She was buried in a cave near the oaks of Mamre. Abraham was very lonely. He missed Sarah very much, but he had one more thing to do. He sent his most trusted helper back to the land of his people to find a wife for Isaac. And along the way, Abraham's helper stopped by a well, and a woman named Rebecca gave him some water and helped him and gave his animals some water. And Rebecca was full of courage, and she was very, very kind. And she invited him to meet her family. And he told her family about Abraham and Sarah and the great family. And Rebecca decided that she would love to be a part of that great family. So she went across the desert, past Shechem and Bethel toward Hebron. And Isaac saw her coming and came to meet them. And then Isaac and Rebecca were married. Now, old Abraham was very old and full of many, many years, and he died and was buried with Sarah in a cave by the trees. Then Isaac and Rebekah had children, and then their children had children, and their children had children, and their children had children. And this kept happening up until your grandparents had your parents, and your parents had you. Now we're all part of this great family, which has become as many as the stars in the sky and the grains of sand in the desert. Now, I wonder, what part of the story did you like best this time? Did you like the part where they traveled along the river, or maybe where Isaac and where Abraham and Sarah had stopped and prayed and left these altars? I wonder what part is most important. Is it the traveling, or is it that Sarah and Abraham really believed in God and what God was saying, and they followed him, and they had their faith, and they believed in him? I wonder where your part, where you are in this story, or what part of this story is about you, do you think? I don't know. Is it that Abraham had that son Isaac, and then they had all those children, and now we're here on this planet because of that? I don't know. Do you think there's any part of this story that we could leave out and still have all the story that we need? I don't know. Have a wonderful day.